Every gesture, every pause, every glance carries meaning, whether we recognize it or not. Human behavior is like a coded language constantly revealing truths, and most people miss the signals right in front of them. During my time in the FBI, I learned quickly that no matter how skilled someone is at hiding, they always give themselves away. A tone that shifts, a hesitation before speaking, even the way they use silence. It all speaks volumes. People are always broadcasting who they are, and the real skill lies in learning where to look and how to interpret it. Most people move through life believing they can carefully control the version of themselves they show to the world, convinced that their words or a practiced smile are enough to mask what they truly feel or intend. The truth is far different. Human behavior is a constant stream of information, and even when people think they are hiding, they are leaking signals they cannot suppress. This is something I learned while serving in the FBI, where every training drill and every case demanded that we read what was beneath the surface. People may polish their words, but they can't disguise the way their eyes shift when they are uneasy, or how their voice tightens when they're concealing something. Even the silences they choose speak louder than the explanations they give. These are the moments where truth slips through the cracks, and it's in these subtle details that you can see who someone really is. In business, relationships, or any high-stakes interaction, recognizing these micro moments gives you the power to understand motives, protect yourself, and make sharper decisions. Human behavior is always speaking. You just need to train yourself to listen with more than your ears. People often underestimate how much of their inner world they reveal without ever saying a word. They believe if they carefully select their words, maintain a steady tone, or wear a convincing smile, they can disguise what is really going on inside. But here's the reality. Behavior never lies. What you do consistently, over time, is the purest reflection of who you are. One moment of kindness can be staged, a single gesture of generosity can be faked, and even an apology can be rehearsed. But when you step back and watch someone repeatedly, their true character surfaces through the patterns that cannot be maintained as an act. This is what I learned in the FBI. Our job was not to be fooled by the words or the image someone wanted to project, but to study the repeated actions that revealed the truth. Think about it. If someone tells you they value honesty, but you constantly catch them in small lies, those lies matter more than the declaration of honesty. If a person says they respect you but continuously crosses your boundaries, their behavior already answered the question about what they truly believe. People can't keep up an act forever, and it's in their daily habits, their reactions under pressure, and their choices when no one is watching that you see who they are. Behavior is not about isolated incidents. It is about observing the rhythm and consistency that unfolds over time. This applies in every arena of life. In relationships, someone's pattern of showing up or failing to show up tells you more than their promises ever could. In the workplace, an employee who consistently cuts corners is giving you more insight than the one who talks about work ethic in meetings. Even in negotiations, patterns of avoidance, exaggeration, or over-explaining are not accidents. They are behaviors that reveal motives, fears, and strategies. The FBI trains agents to pay close attention to these details because it is never the dramatic gestures that uncover the truth, but the small, repeated cues that slip past unnoticed. Behavior also reveals itself in how people treat others, especially those they have nothing to gain from. Watch how someone treats the waiter, the assistant, or the person who cannot advance their status. Those small interactions are not insignificant. They're windows into that person's values and default settings. While words can be carefully chosen to impress, behavior is harder to manipulate, and over time, it becomes impossible to hide. The consistency or inconsistency in someone's actions should always outweigh the power of their explanations. When you start looking at behavior this way, you realize that people are constantly showing you the truth. They don't even realize they're doing it because it's woven into the choices they make day after day. Learning to observe instead of immediately believing words gives you clarity. It arms you with the ability to see what's real, to separate performance from authenticity, and to make smarter judgments about who you trust, who you allow close, and who you must keep at a distance. The power of silence. Silence is one of the most underestimated tools in human interaction, yet it carries more weight than most words ever could. In the FBI, silence was not simply the absence of noise. It was a deliberate strategy. When people are faced with silence, they feel compelled to fill it, and what they choose to say in those moments often reveals truths they were trying to keep hidden. A question followed by a pause can be far more effective than pressing someone with rapid follow-ups, because the quiet creates pressure. That pressure exposes nerves, and those nerves leak out in slips of language, over-explaining, contradictions, or unnecessary details that weren't asked for. People think silence is emptiness, but it is actually a powerful mirror that forces them to confront their own thoughts. In everyday life, this works the same way. When you are negotiating, silence after a proposal makes the other person anxious. They will often begin to lower their own position or reveal information they didn't intend to. In conversations, when you stop rushing to fill every gap with words, you start to notice how quickly others will reveal what's on their mind. Someone might disclose an insecurity, offer an explanation no one asked for, or even admit to something they initially tried to conceal. This happens because silence feels unnatural in social exchanges. Most people are desperate to escape it, so they expose themselves by trying too hard to break it. What many miss is that silence also allows you to observe what is happening beyond the words. When you are not thinking of what to say next, you can pay attention to tone shifts, facial expressions, and body language that emerge in the pause. You might notice the way someone's eyes dart when a subject is touched, or how their shoulders tense as they struggle with what to say. These nonverbal cues often carry more truth than spoken sentences. Silence creates the space for these reactions to surface, because the person is no longer focused on your voice. They are wrestling with their own. Another aspect of silence is how it reveals comfort levels. Pay attention to who can sit in silence without needing to fill it and who panics at the first second of quiet. A person who is secure in themselves can withstand silence without feeling the need to prove something. But those who are hiding, lying, or struggling with confidence often crumble under its weight. They feel compelled to justify themselves, to smooth over what they fear you are thinking, or to overcompensate with words. In doing so, they expose their vulnerabilities and their motives without realizing it. Silence can also shift power dynamics. The one who controls the silence often controls the exchange. In an interrogation room, silence was a weapon. It forced suspects to speak more than they intended. In business, it can make your counterpart reveal their bottom line before you ever show your hand. In relationships, silence after a boundary has been crossed can be stronger than any argument, because it puts the responsibility of reflection on the other person. The absence of words can speak volumes, signaling that you are not rushed, not desperate, and not easily manipulated. When you begin to use silence deliberately, you notice how much more people reveal about themselves without being asked. You don't have to demand answers, you just have to hold the space and let them struggle to fill it. This doesn't mean silence should be used as punishment or manipulation, but rather as a method of listening more deeply. The FBI understood that the truth often hides in the pauses, not in the speeches. By learning to become comfortable with silence, you position yourself to uncover what others are trying to conceal, to hear the story beneath the surface, and to gain insights that words alone would never give you. Watch the micro-reactions. Human beings are constantly leaking information, often in ways they are not even aware of. These leaks don't come through grand gestures or dramatic outbursts, but through the smallest shifts, the fleeting facial expression, the quick glance, the change in tone that lasts less than a second. These are called micro-reactions, and they are some of the most powerful indicators of what a person is truly feeling beneath the surface. In the FBI, we were trained to catch these subtle signals because a suspect could rehearse their story 100 times, but they could not train away a micro-expression. Their face, their posture, their involuntary reactions betrayed them in ways their words never could. Think about when someone smiles at you, but the smile never reaches their eyes. The mouth stretches, but the eyes stay flat or cold. That is not happiness, it's a performance. Or when someone says they're fine, but their shoulders stiffen, their tone sharpens, or their lips tighten. Those quick signals are moments of truth. You don't need to be an FBI agent to pick them up. You just need to slow down your own urge to react and instead pay attention to the micro details that others are unconsciously revealing. These reactions often flash so quickly that people miss them, but with practice, you can train your eyes and ears to notice. A flicker of discomfort when a topic is brought up, a sudden dryness in the mouth, a glance toward the door, a change in breathing rhythm. All of these are micro-reactions tied to emotional states. They are not always proof of lying, but they always mean something is happening internally. For instance, when someone is telling you a story and their voice cracks for just a moment before smoothing out again, that tiny crack is a clue. It may reveal anxiety, guilt, or even fear. And if you pay attention to the context, you'll begin to connect the dots. In everyday life, these micro signals are everywhere. In meetings, you might notice a colleague nodding in agreement, but their jaw tightens at the same time. That tightening means they don't actually agree. They're suppressing their real reaction. In conversations with loved ones, a micro-expression of sadness can flash across the face, even as they insist they're okay. In negotiations, a shift in posture or a momentary grimace before giving a response can show hesitation or unwillingness long before they voice it. People are constantly telling on themselves without meaning to. The only question is whether you're observant enough to catch it. Micro-reactions matter because they bypass the conscious filters. Most people can control their words, some can control their body language to a degree, but very few can control what flashes across their face or slips through their tone when emotions surge. These slips happen in less than a second. And while they may not be enough for the average person to notice casually, they leave an impression. You may not know exactly what you saw, but you'll feel that something was off. Learning to consciously identify these moments turns that vague instinct into a sharp skill. The more you focus on micro-reactions, the more you begin to notice patterns. You'll see how certain people respond when they are uncomfortable, how others react when they are lying, and how subtle cues always align with what they're trying to hide. Over time, you build a mental map of behaviors that lets you read situations more accurately. You stop being misled by polished words and start being guided by what is truly being communicated beneath them. Micro-reactions may be small, but they are the windows into the emotions, motives, and truths people work hardest to conceal. Consistency is credibility. When it comes to understanding people, nothing is more powerful than consistency. Anyone can say the right words in a single moment, and anyone can put on a performance when they want to make a good impression. But consistency cannot be faked for long. It is the thread that ties together behavior, intention, and truth. In the FBI, we learned early on that credibility wasn't measured by how convincing someone sounded in an interview or how polished their story seemed. It was measured by whether their actions lined up over time, whether their choices supported the words coming out of their mouth. That alignment, or lack of it, was what revealed the truth. In everyday life, the same principle applies. People will often tell you who they are through repetition, not declaration. Someone may claim to value honesty, but if you repeatedly catch them in half-truths or omissions, their behavior outweighs their claim. A colleague may insist they respect deadlines, but if they consistently miss them, their pattern tells you the reality. In relationships, a person may promise love and commitment, but if their actions show disregard, neglect, or betrayal, the consistency of that behavior is what speaks the loudest. Words can charm and mislead, but actions, repeated actions, become the most reliable evidence of character. Consistency is also how trust is built, because trust thrives on predictability. When you know how someone is likely to behave, you can rely on them. But when their words and actions are constantly in conflict, the inconsistency creates doubt. This is why credibility is never about one grand gesture. It is about the steady pattern. The small choices people make every day, the way they show up when no one is watching, the respect or disrespect they display in repeated interactions. All of this paints a clearer picture than any speech or explanation. Credibility belongs to the person who can align what they say with what they do, time after time. It's also important to notice when inconsistency itself becomes the pattern. Some people are so skilled at saying what others want to hear that they can mask their true intentions temporarily. But even then, the cracks appear. They overpromise but underdeliver. They shift their stories depending on who is listening, or they give reassurances that are never matched with tangible proof. The inconsistency in their behavior becomes its own reliable signal. You know not to trust their words because you've seen the mismatch too many times. That recognition is powerful because it allows you to protect yourself, make sharper decisions, and avoid falling into the trap of believing a narrative instead of the evidence in front of you. In business, leadership, and personal life, the principle remains the same. Watch for alignment. People who are consistent build credibility without needing to prove it, because their behavior speaks for them. People who are inconsistent undermine their own words, often without realizing how transparent they've become. Once you train yourself to look at consistency as the true measure of trust, you stop being swayed by surface appearances and start recognizing who is reliable, who is deceptive, and who is worth your confidence. Manipulators and deceivers. One of the most important skills you can develop in life is the ability to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate or deceive you. These individuals rarely announce themselves openly. In fact, they usually present themselves as charming, helpful, or overly agreeable at first. But underneath the surface, their intentions are very different. They want control, influence, or an advantage, and they rely on tactics that most people overlook. In the FBI, spotting these patterns was essential because manipulative behavior often disguised hidden agendas, and the ability to detect them quickly meant staying a step ahead. Once you know what to look for, you'll see that manipulators and deceivers follow predictable patterns that give them away. One common tell is over-explaining. Instead of giving a clear, concise answer, a manipulator will often flood you with excessive details, unnecessary backstory, or long-winded justifications. This tactic works on two levels. It distracts you from noticing what they are avoiding, and it creates the illusion of transparency. But true honesty rarely needs to be dressed up with endless explanations. Pay attention when someone gives you far more information than you asked for. It could be a red flag that they are trying to convince rather than simply tell the truth. Another sign is the use of vague or slippery language. Deceivers avoid committing to specifics because specificity ties them down. You'll notice them relying on phrases like, I think, probably, around that time, or I guess, when pressed for answers. This is not the language of certainty. It is the language of avoidance. By staying vague, they create room to change their story later, or to claim you misunderstood what they said. In contrast, people who are telling the truth tend to anchor their statements with clarity because they are recalling events rather than constructing them. Manipulators also shift blame with ease. Rather than owning their mistakes, they redirect responsibility toward others, circumstances, or even you. This pattern becomes obvious when someone consistently refuses accountability, no matter the situation. In relationships, this might sound like, I only did that because you made me, while in professional settings, it can show up as, it wasn't my fault, the team dropped the ball. Notice the frequency of these blame-shifting habits because they reveal a mindset that prioritizes self-preservation over truth. Another common tactic is excessive flattery or ingratiation. Manipulators often try to disarm you by making you feel special, complimenting you in ways that seem over the top, or aligning themselves with your views to build false rapport. It feels good in the moment, but pay attention when the praise feels unnatural or when it comes too quickly from someone you barely know. Genuine respect takes time to build. Manipulation tries to accelerate trust so it can be exploited. Evasion is another signal. When you ask a direct question, a manipulator will often answer a different question, change the subject, or give an indirect response. They may even use humor or distraction to shift your focus away from what you asked. This tactic works because most people don't press further once an answer has been given, even if it doesn't actually address the question. Train yourself to notice when someone dodges specifics or resists clarity. Their avoidance is not random, it's purposeful. Body language often supports these verbal cues. Manipulators may smile too often, maintain eye contact in a way that feels forced, or exaggerate their gestures to appear convincing. But if you observe closely, you'll notice inconsistencies. The timing is off, the intensity doesn't match the words, or the expressions feel rehearsed. For example, laughter that comes half a second too late or a smile that lingers too long can be signs that the emotion is staged rather than genuine. What's most important to understand is that manipulation and deception rely on patterns. No single behavior proves someone is being dishonest, but repeated tactics create a clear picture. The over-explaining, the vagueness, the blame-shifting, the flattery, the evasion, they begin to stack up. And once you see the repetition, you can't ignore it. The key is not to react emotionally in the moment, but to observe steadily, gather information, and recognize when the behaviors are telling a different story than the words. Once you start paying attention, you'll realize manipulators and deceivers are never as hidden as they think. They are constantly revealing themselves through the very tactics they use. Observe, don't judge. One of the most valuable lessons drilled into me during my time in the FBI was that observation always comes before judgment. The natural instinct for most people is to label others quickly, good or bad, honest or dishonest, trustworthy or suspicious. This snap judgment comes from our need to simplify the world around us, to put people into categories that help us feel secure. But the problem with judgment is that it clouds your vision. Once you decide someone is good, you tend to overlook their flaws. Once you decide someone is bad, you stop seeing anything else they do with clarity. Judgment anchors you, while observation frees you. When you choose to observe instead of judge, you allow yourself to gather more information. You're not rushing to conclusions. You're simply collecting data. You notice not just what someone says, but how they say it. You pay attention to what they do repeatedly, what they avoid, and how they react under stress. Over time, patterns emerge, and those patterns are far more reliable than any first impression. In the Bureau, this mindset was critical because lives could depend on our ability to see the truth beneath the surface. Assumptions could cost us everything, but patience and observation gave us the upper hand. In everyday life, this principle is just as powerful. When you meet someone new, it's tempting to decide immediately whether you like or dislike them, whether you can trust them or not. But stepping back and allowing yourself to simply watch provides far more insight. For example, instead of deciding that a colleague is untrustworthy because they seemed nervous in a meeting, you observe over time. Do they always avoid eye contact, or was that a reaction to stress in the moment? Instead of labeling a friend as reliable because they showed up once when you needed them, you notice whether they continue to show up consistently or if it was an isolated act. Observation creates clarity. Judgment often creates illusion. Another reason judgment is dangerous is that it is often rooted in bias. We judge people based on appearance, tone of voice, or similarity to someone we've known in the past. These mental shortcuts may feel accurate, but they can blind us to reality. A polished speaker may seem credible, but their behavior over time may prove otherwise. A quiet person may seem suspicious, when in reality they are simply reserved. When you remove the rush to judge, you give yourself space to see beyond your own bias. That neutrality is where real understanding begins. Observation also requires discipline. It's not passive, it's active. You train yourself to listen more than you speak, to watch without interrupting, to let people reveal themselves at their own pace. In silence and patience, people show you who they are. They reveal their motives in the choices they make, in the way they treat others, in the consistency of their behavior. Your role is not to decide too early, but to let the evidence accumulate. Over time, the truth will stand out with far more certainty than if you had rushed to categorize them from the start. This practice not only protects you from deception, but also gives you influence. When people feel they are not being judged, they open up more. They reveal more of themselves because they do not feel the need to defend against a label. By staying neutral and simply observing, you gain access to information that would have been hidden if you had shown immediate judgment. It is both a shield and a tool. You protect yourself from false assumptions while also giving others the space to expose their true selves. Learning to observe without judgment is not about ignoring your instincts, it's about sharpening them. It's about replacing the rush of assumption with the patience of awareness. Over time, this habit transforms how you see people, how you protect yourself, and how you navigate every interaction with clarity and control. At the heart of every human action lies a force that is deeper than the surface behaviors we observe. People are not driven randomly. They are moved by their needs, their fears, and their motives. This truth was central in the FBI's work, because understanding what motivates someone allowed us to anticipate their next move. If a person's greatest need was control, their behavior would consistently bend toward power dynamics. If their deepest fear was rejection, they would act in ways to secure acceptance, even if it meant lying or manipulating. Once you identify what sits at the core of someone's psychology, you can begin to see a pattern in their choices that words alone cannot disguise. Everyday life offers countless examples of this. Take the colleague who constantly interrupts or dominates conversations. On the surface, it looks like arrogance, but beneath it may lie an insecurity, a fear of being overlooked or irrelevant. Their need for validation drives them to act louder, not because they are confident, but because they are desperate to be noticed. Or think about the friend who overpromises and never follows through. Their pattern isn't simply laziness. It may be rooted in the fear of disappointing others in the moment, so they say yes to everything, even though they cannot deliver. When you shift your lens from judging the surface action to understanding the underlying motive, you gain clarity about who that person really is and why they do what they do. Motives don't just reveal truth, they also help you predict. If you know that someone is motivated by financial gain, then you can expect their choices to align with opportunities that secure money, even at the expense of relationships. If you recognize that someone fears exposure, you'll notice how carefully they craft their image and how fiercely they avoid situations that might reveal flaws. This kind of insight becomes a tool for protection because you stop being blindsided by behavior. Instead, you see it coming because you've already mapped the deeper psychological driver behind it. In relationships, this understanding can be a shield and a guide. When you know what someone values most, you can anticipate how they will act under pressure. A partner motivated by security will respond differently to conflict than one motivated by independence. A friend whose biggest fear is abandonment will behave differently than one who fears betrayal. Recognizing these drivers helps you set realistic expectations and prevents you from being deceived by words that don't match the deeper truth. People can say anything, but their motives direct their choices in ways that cannot be hidden forever. Another layer to this is the emotional leaks that appear when motives clash with reality. For example, someone whose primary need is admiration may try to mask jealousy when others receive recognition. But no matter how polished their words, micro-reactions, tensed lips, narrowed eyes, a sudden drop in tone, reveal the frustration beneath. These leaks are psychological truths escaping the cage of control. The more you train yourself to notice, the more you'll see that people are not nearly as good at hiding as they think. Their motives and fears seep into their behaviors in countless small ways. Motives predict patterns. But this is not just for criminal investigations. It applies everywhere. In business, knowing what someone values most can give you an advantage in negotiations. In friendships, recognizing someone's fears helps you understand their triggers and responses. In leadership, identifying the underlying drivers of your team members helps you guide them more effectively. The key is to look beyond the words, beyond the excuses, and into the psychological forces steering the behavior. Once you see those forces, the chaos of human interaction begins to make sense, and what once felt unpredictable becomes far easier to read. The truth about human behavior is that people are always showing you who they are, even when they think they are hiding it. The mistake most people make is focusing only on what is being said, believing that words carry the full story. But words are just one layer, and often the weakest one. The real story lives in the details, in the body language that betrays unease, in the silence that makes someone rush to explain themselves, in the inconsistencies between what is promised and what is delivered. The truth slips through in the patterns people create, and those patterns become undeniable when you learn to watch without distraction. This is why the FBI placed so much emphasis on reading behavior, because it never lies. It may be subtle, it may be fleeting, but it is always there for those who are trained to see it. When you start to look at people this way, you realize that behavior is a kind of language, and once you learn to read it, you gain an advantage in every area of your life. In business, you can tell when someone is bluffing in a negotiation or when their confidence is a mask for uncertainty. In relationships, you can recognize when someone's affection is genuine and when it's performative, saving yourself from misplaced trust. In social interactions, you begin to see the difference between authenticity and manipulation, between someone who is consistent and someone who is playing a role. Human behavior, once understood, strips away illusions and reveals what is actually driving a person beneath the surface. This awareness doesn't just protect you from harm, it empowers you. By seeing people clearly, you stop wasting time on those who drain you, deceive you, or fail to respect your boundaries. You stop believing explanations that don't match the evidence in front of you, and you stop being surprised when someone shows you their true nature, because you have been observing the clues all along. This clarity allows you to make smarter choices about who you allow into your life, who you invest your energy in, and who you should walk away from. It is a form of psychological armor that shields you from manipulation and disappointment. But it also gives you influence, because when you can read people, you can connect with them at a deeper level. You begin to recognize their needs, their fears, and their motivations, and you can speak to those truths directly. Influence isn't about overpowering others. It's about understanding them so well that your words, your silence, and your actions resonate with what matters to them. This is how you build trust. This is how you lead, and this is how you negotiate from a position of strength. The very skill that protects you from deception also equips you to create stronger bonds with the people who are authentic and trustworthy. The more you practice, the sharper this skill becomes. What once seemed invisible will become obvious. You'll notice the slight tightening of a jaw when someone is uncomfortable, the quick change in tone when they're hiding something, the pattern of avoiding responsibility when they're caught. You'll hear what people mean rather than just what they say. And once you develop that eye, you cannot unsee it. The world around you becomes clearer, sharper, and easier to navigate because you've tapped into the universal truth. Behavior is the ultimate truth teller, and this truth, once mastered, transforms the way you live. It shifts you from reacting blindly to moving with intention. It places you in control of your interactions rather than being controlled by them. It gives you the ability to stand in any room, whether with friends, strangers, or adversaries, and read it with precision. The truth about human behavior is simple. It's always there, waiting to be seen. You just have to stop focusing only on words and start watching everything else. When you do, you'll never look at people the same way again.